Hello again, and welcome to another Unity and Fmod tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at our Footstep script again, and we're going to be upgrading it a little so that the footstep sound changes depending on what material our player walks on. Before we get started, I just want to apologise quickly for my really raspy, horrible sounding voice. I've had a really sore throat lately, so if I sound really boring and dull, I do apologise in advance. So with that out of the way, let's jump straight into it. So here's a little quick scene I've set up in Unity. As you can see, I've got three floors or three different surfaces for my player to walk on. If I quickly jump into the scene, you'll notice that as I walk on each one of them, we'll get a different sound. So if I walk on this green one, we can hear him walking across grass. If I walk over to the red one, we can hear metal. If I walk over to the grey one, we can hear concrete, although I recorded it and I've labelled it as all wood, and I'm thinking I had wood walking files, but I actually used concrete files. So if we take a look over here, you'll see I've labelled some stuff floor wood. That should be floor concrete, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're just going to call it wood. So we've got metal, grass, and wood that sounds like concrete. So those are our three surface areas we walk on. This tutorial is going to be quite code heavy. We're going to be looking at Fmod and what we do in there, but a lot of it's going to be a lot of controlling where the sounds play will be through scripting. So I'll try and make it as simple to follow as possible. So let's firstly dive into Fmod to see what we've done over there. So actually, I'll tell you what, the first thing before we go into Fmod, let's have a look at what I've done in Unity. So before we dive into scripts, I've set up three trigger boxes, one for on top of the grass floor, one on top of the metal floor, and one on top of the wood floor. And you can set up trigger boxes quite easily. You just come up here to create a 3D object, create a cube like I've done here. Where it says box collider over here, you want to tick the is trigger box to true, and if you don't want it to be seen, you just get rid of the mesh by coming over here, clicking on this little dot, scrolling up, and click none. So now we have an invisible trigger box that when our player enters the box, we can code to do various different things. And that's what I've done basically for my surfaces. I've said that I've marked all these different trigger boxes to say that when our player walks in them, that's how we're going to change our sound. And we'll talk a bit more about those in detail in a bit. So let's have a look at the Fmod side of things. So as you can see, if I quickly get it back up, I'm using the same event as I did in my last Footsteps video, which by the way I'm going to link in the description because you'll probably want to watch that first before you check this out, because we'll be jumping straight off of that. So I've still got my wood sound effect, my wood audio track, my wood multi-sound, but I've also got two more. I've got my metal and my grass, which I've done the same thing as I did for wood. I opened up a multi-sound, dragged some audio tracks into the playlist. So I've done for metal there, I've done for grass. I've automated them a bit, or modulated the pitch and the volume rather. The difference is, for these, I've set up their own individual parameters, as you can see up here. So for wood, whenever the wood parameter is set to 0, the volume of the wood multi-sounds will be at -80. However, when it's set to 1, it will be at 0, and I've given it this this sort of curve, which I will explain why I've done in a bit. Same for metal. When the metal parameter is at 0, we won't hear it. When it's at 1, we will hear it. And the same for grass. The way you set these parameters up is by coming up to this little plus sign here. You click on that, you click add parameter, and then you can call it whatever you want. And you can decide how big you want the parameter to be. So for these, I've just set them between 0 and 1 because that's all we need for this tutorial. So that's all that really needs to happen on the Fmod side. If I quickly solo the multi-sounds for you, let's have a listen. Oh, whoops. So there's our wood. Let's quickly solo metal. Oh, hold on. Let's set the parameter to 1 so we can hear it. So let's have a listen. There we go. And grass, if I solo that, set the parameter to 1, and play that. There we go. So that's all working fine. So once you set all that up, you want to do what we usually do, come over to File, save it and click Build. I've already done that, so I'm just going to leave that as is. And now we're going to jump back over to Unity. We're going to have a look at our Footstep script. So if I come over to our player, this is our Footstep script. Let's open that up. Oh, edit script. So this is, let's make that a bit bigger so we can see it. So this is our Footstep script. This is our old Footstep script that we used last time. As you can see, there's only a few functions that are being called and not a lot of variables. If I jump into our new Footstep script, we've got quite a few more variables and the addition of one big main function, which is what we're going to be using to switch between our materials. So let's start off by looking at the variables I've added. So as you can see, I've still got our public string variable, which I'm using to find our event in Fmod in Unity, input footsteps. The difference is, however, I've added this variable, which Fmod uses it's another way of Fmod and Unity finding events in Fmod. If we wanted to, we could just use this. We could just say that this equals our event and call it whatever our event is. So if I went equals quotation marks event colon dash and then wrote out whatever the name of our event is, so test footsteps and then quotation marks, we could just leave it like that and end it and it would find our event automatically. But the reason why we are using this in particular is because whereas the old way we found our event, we wouldn't be able to access any parameters with it, whereas in this one, with the help of these three variables here, we are able to access our free parameters. So in our case, our wood, our metal, and our grass parameters. So let's jump back into Unity and the script. So as you can see, I've called up an event instance variable and three parameter instance variables. We'll come back to how these work together in a second. So those are our Fmod variables. Let's look at our Unity variables. So we've still got our two from last time, the player is moving and the walking speed variable. We've also got three more private float variables, wood value, metal value, and grass value. And what these are going to do is basically they are going to change depending on where our player is or what trigger our our player has entered, and then we're going to use that information to send to our parameters and then back to Fmod, which will then change our parameters in real time. So let's jump straight into the functions. So here's our void start function, which I've just moved to the top just to explain what's happening in here, because a lot has changed in here. Last time we only had the invoke repeating line. This time we've got four more. So first thing we've done is I've said that the footsteps event function over here is going to equal whatever event we find in our input footsteps variable over here. Sorry, not function variable, footsteps event variable. And you do this by simply writing this line out here: fmod unity.runtimemanager.create instance brackets input footsteps. Again, if I wanted to, I could just type out the event in the brackets. So once we've done that, we then want to say we want to access the parameters within that event. So now that our footsteps event is equal to our input footsteps, we can say get parameter wood, metal, and grass, which, as you can see, I've quoted them because these need to be the exact names that we've used in Fmod up here. So I've quoted them, and I've said out wood parameter, metal parameter, grass parameter. So basically, I've linked our parameters in Fmod to these variables here, which allows us to access them. Okay, so if we have a look at our update function that's called every frame the game is running, I've said that those three variables are wood parameter, metal parameter, grass parameter. I've said that the value of them is going to basically be the same as whatever our wood value, metal value, and grass variables are. As you can see, there's a lot of connecting between variables in this, but hopefully this will make sense. So whatever value these become, these will become the same values, which will then be set to Fmod, which will change these values. Okay, so back into model develop. Yes, that's all we need to know for void update, that these values are going to be the same as our wood value with parameters. They're all going to be the same. The call footsteps function has changed, but I'm going to explain that at the end. So the next thing we need to know is the new function we've added, which is the on-trigger stay function. Now the on-trigger stay function is basically triggered for every frame we are in one of our trigger boxes. I've added this parameter here and called it material check, which is basically going to check which trigger box we are in. And the way it does this is with tags. So if I go back to Unity, if you look up here, where I've clicked on my little player, if you look up here, I can choose a tag for my player. For the player, I'd most likely call it player. And what we can do with tags is call them up in our scripts to reference specific game objects within Unity. So if I go to one of my triggers, let's go to our grass trigger, you'll see I've tagged it with grass material. And that's not, you probably won't have that tag in your Unity, which is because I've created it myself. So if we go add tag and click plus, we can then create our own tag and call it whatever we want. I'm not going to do that because I've already created one for wood, metal and grass. So going back to monodevelop, as you can see, we'll come back to this variable I've created in a sec, but as you can see, the first thing that happens in the onTriggerStay function is that it checks to see what tag our trigger box has. And I've given it the option for each wood, metal and grass tags that I've created in Unity. So if we walk into a trigger box and it's tagged with the wood material, what it's going to do is perform 3 different functions for each of the values, the value variables we created earlier. To sum up what this variable is doing is it's basically changing whatever our wood value is at the time of entering the trigger to 1 or 0, depending on which value it is, within a given amount of time. And the way it does that is with this lerp function. So that's basically what lerp does, is it changes between one value to another within a given amount of time. In our case, we are using float values, as you can see by the F that I've got after all our numbers. Float values are basically just numbers that you can assign to a variable that allow you to use decimals as well as whole numbers. So to tell our function that we're using floats, we add this mathf bit at the beginning of lerp. So that's how it knows we're using floats. Then what we do is we create some brackets and we say what value we're starting on. So in our case, it would just be, well, in wood the values case, it's just whatever wood value is starting on as we enter it or as we sit in our trigger. What we want the value to change to. So in our case, when we're in the wood material trigger box, we want it to change it to 1, so that the parameter in Fmod will then change all the way to 1. And we also want to say how long it's going to take. Now, what I've done here is I've used time.delta_time, and I've also multiplied that by our function up here, our variable up here rather, called fade speed, which I've assigned to 10. Now, I'm going to put a link in the description for 2 tutorials that describe and explain lerp and time.delta_time a lot better than I have done. But what you need to know for this tutorial is that time.delta_time basically takes whatever frames per second you're using, whether you're running at 60 or 30 frames per second, and instead of performing a function every frame, it performs a function not every second, but a certain amount of times within a second. So if I was just to get rid of the times phase speed, what this would be doing is saying, okay, we want the value of wood to change from whatever it starts as to 1 within 1 second. That's basically what time.delta_time does on its own. It does it within a second. However, by multiplying it by 10, which is our fade speed variable, I'm saying I want the value of wood to change from 0 to 1, or whatever the wood value is, to 1, within 1/10 of a second. And by changing this number, you know, we can determine how quickly or how slowly the change is. The idea of this is to smooth out our change between the events in Fmod. If I quickly jump back into Fmod, if we were to change, let's say we're in wood and one of our audio tracks is played. So the cursor's halfway through the audio track, but then suddenly I've moved into a different box trigger. So now we want to hear metal. However, if we had the parameter changed from wood 1 to 0 straight away, and from 0 on metal to 1 straight away, this audio track that was in the middle of being played would just cut out straight away, and that wouldn't sound natural. We want to give the audio track enough time to fade out so it sounds natural. We hear the whole footstep, which is partly why I've added this curve here. Because as it changes from, where's my cursor? As it changes from 1 to 0, we're keeping the sound consistent for long enough so that our audio track finishes before the next one comes in. And by changing the fade speed value, we can change how long it takes from 1 to change to 0, and from 0 to change from 1. So by multiplying time.delta time by 10, I essentially said I want the change from 1 to 0, or from 0 to 1, take 1/10 of a second. Okay, so that's the whole point of that. If we wanted to, we could just say, if the material check is wood material, we could just say change wood value from 0 to 1, and it happened instantly, but then it wouldn't sound natural. So that's the whole point of using the lerp function and the time.delta time function. So hopefully that explains it well enough for you. Like I said, I'm going to be putting some better tutorials in the description if you want to learn more about them. So basically what I've done is, when we walk into the wood material trigger, wood value is going to change from whatever it was on to 1, and the arrow is going to change from whatever they were on to 0. Same thing for metal, except metal changes from 1, the rest change from 0. And the same for grass. Grass changes to 1, the rest changes to 0. Cool. So the last thing I want to talk about is, actually, before I do talk about that, I'm just going to quickly write something out. If you didn't want to use triggers, you could instead use collisions. So you could say that whenever the player touches the ground, the same function happens. I'm just going to write that out for you now, so you know what that looks like, because it is a little different. So we'd still call it material check. By the way, you can call the parameter whatever you like. I've just called it material check. So that would. So if you wanted to use collisions, you'd write that out like that, and then on the if statement, you'd put if. Still put material check. Instead of compare tag, you put game object dot tag equals, and then you would write out your quoted tag over here. So if I just copy and paste that here, you'd write that out, end the brackets, and type in this function here. If you wanted to, you might use collisions just to make it easier for yourself. So if I go back into Unity, it saves you having to create trigger boxes. Instead, you could just tag the actual surface that your player touches, tag that with material, and it worked the same way. I just find with triggers you get a bit more control over where the sounds will be played. That's but it's up to you. You can use collisions if you like. So I'm going to get rid of that. I don't need any of that. Oh, whoops. Let's put that there. Cool. Last thing is the call footsteps function. I've changed it. Last time we used fmod.unity.runtimemanager.play1shot, and then we called our variable that had the fmod event attached. This time, all I've done is I've used our variable up here. Oh, not that one. This one, which we've said is the same as the input footsteps variable, and I've just put dot start, which is a function you can use with fmod integrated. And the reason for this, I just noticed that with the play one shot, you're unable to change parameters in real time. Excuse me, that's my sore throat again. You're unable to change the parameters in real time. If I were to start a Unity and just use this, our parameters would just be set to whatever they are defaulted in Fmod, which, by the way, if I right click, you can default them here, which is a good thing to do, so it knows where to start your parameters at. So if I click set as initial value, the woods parameter will be set to 0 as it starts. So using the play one shot, we can't change them while the game's running, but with footsteps event.start or just .start, we can change the parameters in real time. Now I think that is everything. Feel free to copy this script. This is just something I've wrote out. Again, we're still using, we're still checking the get axis, and we're still using on disable if we ever want to disable the script. We want the sounds to stop playing. That's all the same. This is the main bulk of the change. This, which detects our material, and obviously all the extra variables we've added. So I'm going to save this and jump back into Unity. Hopefully I didn't mess it up in some way by editing it. But if I walk around, we hear grass, we hear concrete, and we hear metal. If you notice, as I walk across them, you might still hear some of the sounds being played unnaturally in other boxes on other surfaces. And if you find that's the case with yours, all you need to do is come over to Mod Develop, come down to where we wrote our fade speed, and just change that. Just change the number until you find something that works best for you. Obviously, depending on how fast your player's moving, and how many times you call the call footsteps function, it might differ. So you have a little bit of experiment with those values and see which one works for you. So that is all there is to it. So that's part 2 of our footsteps tutorial. I might do another explaining how we can prevent the player character from playing the sounds while we're not touching anything, or while we're just out of one of these triggers. So let me know if that's something you want to see. I might be looking into doing some tutorials on Unreal, or maybe even on the Steam Audio plugin that's just been released. I hear there's the new beta is available on the new version, or on the latest version of Unreal, so I might look into doing tutorials on that. Or I might just go back to doing some sound design tutorials or making sound effects in Logic. So let me know what you want to see. Thanks for watching. Hopefully my voice sounds better and I don't bore you to death next time. I've been Henry Scott, and I'll see you